All right. And you could all hopefully hear me. All right. I think a timeline will be good for you to see while we're talking about where we've been in the course. So I'm going to go to our share. And I am going to put out the timeline.
Double click. And then just hit share. Okay, then hit share. Up at the top, three. Okay. Did you hit share?
I think so.
I don't think you did. Okay, everybody should see it.
Okay. And I'm going to,
Joseph's telling you.
Joseph, thank you for the thumbs up. I'm going to assume everybody can see this. Timeline of biblical events. It's important that we have some kind of context. I have given somewhat arbitrary dates here, not arbitrary completely, but I've tried to, because this is never an exact science, I've tried to give you a framework for understanding all of Jewish history, starting with the time of the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The best that I can do for you is there's a difference among scholars as to when the patriarchal period in Jewish history began. Some say as late as the 1400s, some say as early as the 1800s. I chose the middle of those two periods of time. I chose the period of 1600 BCE as being the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I think that's a pretty conservative estimate of when the patriarchs lived. They lived 1600 years before the Common Era. To give you a next date on our schedule, I told you that if the patriarchs lived 1600 BCE, the exodus from Egypt occurred sometime around 1250 BCE, give or take. So about 1250, that was the time of the events described in one of our lectures and the events that we rehearsed this past week in our celebration of the holiday of Passover. The exodus occurred about that period of time, allowing for the wandering in the wilderness and the time it took the Israelites to get to the land of Canaan. I have indicated that the conquest of the land of Canaan took place approximately 1200 BCE. In other words, I allowed 50-year period. So sometime around 1200 BCE, Joshua and the tribes of Israel, after wandering in the desert for 40 years, entered the land of Canaan, and in a period of military conflicts that lasted 3 to 4 to 5 years, they succeeded in initially conquering the land. Following Joshua, Jewish history goes through a change. During the years of the exodus from Egypt, during the years of wandering in the wilderness, during the actual conquest of the land, the Jewish people were relatively united. They were unified. They were one people, having spent the years of wandering in the wilderness, having been unified by receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai, having come together to join in conquering the land of Israel on both sides of the Jordan River. The Jewish people at the time of the conquest were very unified, but just shortly after the conquest, I indicated last 2 sessions ago that in the period of the judges, the Jewish people again became divided, not divided in terms of nation, divided in terms of geography. And hopefully all of you received the map I wasn't able to show you last time, the map of the different tribes of Israel, which I hope illustrate how the Jewish people, though united in one nation, were divided into different geographical areas. And during the period of Judges, which I indicate as occurring sometime between 1200 and 1020, the Jewish people were ruled by their local leaders or tribal leaders, local officials, and periodically these charismatic military figures called judges who sufficed to rule the Jewish people for a period of about 180 years. From the period of 1200 to 1020 BCE, Israel was ruled by the local tribes. What happens, we discussed this the last session, was that eventually Israel faces an enemy that they are no longer able to defeat as individual separate tribes. The truth is that with the arrival of the Philistines, when Israel confronts the Philistines, they now face an enemy that is so powerful, that is so technologically and militarily superior to anything the individual tribes are able to put on the field, that they are forced finally to come together and to unify under a king. And I think I described to you last time how in the face of the threat of the Philistines, who were threatening to overrun a good portion of Israel and were threatening a large number of tribes, the people came together and demanded of the prophet Samuel that he anoint for them, choose for them a king to rule over them. As they said, we acknowledge that God is our ultimate king, but we need a human king to go out before us, to fight our battles for us, to lead us into war and to bring us back. And Samuel, though somewhat reluctantly, finally agrees to the people's request. And I told you he initially chooses as king of Israel a man by the name of Saul. You'll notice on the timeline, the judges rule from about 1200 to 1020 BCE, and about 1020, that is as far as I can make sure, as I can figure, 1020 begins the reign of King Saul. He reigned for about 20 years before he was replaced, before he died in battle. And Saul, who began his kingship in 1020, eventually dies fighting the Philistines, and he is replaced in the year 1000 by his successor and his former adversary, a man called King David. About the year 1000, David becomes king of Israel. And during David's time, the war against the Philistines is finally successfully won, is prosecuted. Jewish people finally succeed in reducing the power and the influence of the Philistines. And sometime during David's reign, from 1000 to 970, the Philistines cease to be a force that bothers the Jewish people. David reigns for a period of about 30 years as king of the combined kingdom, and he is followed by his son Solomon. Solomon becomes king of Israel in the year 970. Now, as we get closer to modern times, as we get closer and closer to our own times, the dates become a little bit more precise. From lots of evidence, both internal evidence in the Hebrew scriptures, but also external evidence from outside sources, we pretty much know that Solomon was king of Israel sometime around the period of 970. During that period of time, Israel attained its greatest influence, its greatest period of expansion that it had ever known. During Solomon's time, he succeeded in building the temple in Jerusalem. During his time, most of the other enemies of Israel, not just the Philistines, but other local enemies of Israel, had been subdued. And during Solomon's time, Israel was something of a major power in the Middle East. As a matter of fact, when Solomon was building his temple, we know that with his alliance with Lebanon, Solomon was a major player, a major king, a major ruler in the lands of the Middle East. What happens, however, is that period of unity that began with Saul and continued with David and culminates with the reign of Solomon, suddenly that breaks apart again. Jewish history is plagued. We go through periods of unity, of coming together as a people, of joining together, only to give way to periods of disunity. So from the time of Saul in 1020 to the time of Solomon in 970, the Jewish people had been combined together. They were no longer local tribes. They were now one nation. If they had remained a nation, they probably would have had a very different history. But unfortunately, Solomon, despite his reputation as being wise, was not a very good king. The truth of the matter is that Solomon, both because of the taxes that he levied on his own people to build the temple and to accomplish many of his building projects, and because of the workload he laid upon the Jewish people, a kind of a required corvée, where sections of the population had to work and participate in projects that Solomon required the people to participate in. By the end of Solomon's reign, about the year 930, Solomon's rule was not very popular anymore. As a matter of fact, when he dies in 930, he leaves a son who will follow him, who's supposed to follow him. The son's name is Rehoboam. But unfortunately, by the time of Solomon's death, he has become so unpopular that a large proportion of the Jewish people no longer feel connected to him or to his dynasty. And unfortunately, in the year 930 BCE, the kingdom of Israel, Judea, the united kingdom of Saul and David and Solomon, is broken up into two kingdoms, what we call the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The kingdom of Israel was found in the north, and the kingdom of Judah and Benjamin and whatnot were found in the south. From that period of time, from the division in 930 until the end of the history of independent Israel, Israel proceeds through a series of events that ultimately lead to destruction. From 930 till 721, the northern kingdom of Israel slowly declines. It becomes weaker and weaker. Israel and Judea not only aren't aligned with one another, allied with each other, they are at odds with one another. And the division between them and the effect of rising enemies around them eventually caused the conquest of the northern kingdom of Israel in the year 721. So the two kingdoms of Israel, the kingdom in the north, Israel, and the kingdom in the south, Judah, are separately defeated. The kingdom in the north is defeated in 721 BCE. And finally, the kingdom in the south is defeated in the year 586 BCE, which marks the destruction of the first temple. Solomon's temple, which had been built sometime during his reign between around 970, it comes to an end with the destruction of the temple and the destruction of the kingdom of Judah. That is a brief timeline of events in biblical history. When we have gone through this timeline, we come now to a period of time when Jews are no longer sovereign in their land. From the time of their return to Israel, from the time of Joshua's conquest in 1200, up to the period of about 586, Israel had been united and independent. But first with the destruction in the north, and second with the destruction in Judah, Israel loses its autonomy and will never be independent again, except for a brief period until modern times. So our biblical period is really now coming to a close. I will just indicate to you that Judah was conquered in 586. I'm going to go to our next slide. And I'm going to compare the two kingdoms before I look at the kings of Israel. Comparisons between the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. If you go to the book of Kings and you count how many kings ruled in the north and how many kings ruled in the south, you will find the following. 20 kings ruled over the southern kingdom of Judah. And those kings reigned for a total of 344 years, from 931 until the destruction of Judah. The kings of the south ruled for 344 years. Turning now to the north, the kingdom of Israel, they also had about roughly the same number of kings. They had about 19 kings that are listed in the book of Kings instead of 20. But they only reigned for 210 years. The north of Israel was destroyed in 721. So what that means is that the kings of Israel ruled for much shorter periods of time. Each reign of the king of Israel was much shorter than that of the reigns of the kings in the south. And this was because troubles and problems occurring in the north constantly were reflected in a change of dynasty. The southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, continued to exist for 135 years after the destruction of the northern kingdom. From the destruction of Israel in 721 till the destruction of Judea and Jerusalem in 686, that was a period of about 135 years that the kingdom in the south, that Judah continued to exist. Who conquered who? Okay, these notes will all be sent to you. The northern kingdom of Israel was conquered in 721 BCE, and it was conquered by the Assyrian Empire, by Assyria. Assyria conquered Israel, and all of the tribes in the north, all of the people who lived in the north, were taken into exile. Those tribes consisted of 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel, and because they were lost to history after the exile, we call them the 10 lost tribes. If you have heard about the lost tribes of Israel, it refers to the tribes that were located in the northern part of the country. When Israel was conquered by Assyria in the year 721, the Assyrians took a large portion of the population of Israel and they moved it to another part of the empire. This was the way in which conquerors were successful in defeating possible rebellions. What you did was, after you defeated an enemy, after you defeated his major cities and wiped them out, you took a major part of the population and you exiled them to some other land, and then you brought people from some other land in to replace them. In other words, you changed populations. So about the year 721, what became known as the 10 tribes of Israel, or whatever was Israel that was left in the north, they were taken into captivity, and I say they disappeared from history. What do I mean? We don't really know what happened to them. Some of them probably came back later, but the fact is that being exiled for such a long period of time, by the time the Jews finally did return to Israel, many of them had assimilated and had disappeared from history. You can imagine a period of that time, people went to different places, they were uprooted from their land, and many of them completely disappeared, so that the northern tribes of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, disappears from history. There's all kinds of theories as to where they went, what happened to them, where they settled. There are constantly articles that are being written about where are the 10 lost tribes, what countries did they go to, where were they resettled, whatever happened to them. They basically assimilated. Most of those northern Jewish population disappeared to history. The kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom, lasts a little longer, and it is destroyed in the year 586 by a different kingdom, the kingdom of Babylonia. And in 586, the king of Babylonia, Nebuchadnezzar, who has already struck the land once, goes in, he destroys the temple, and he does the same thing to Judah that the Assyrian king had done to northern Israel. He takes a large part of the population of Judah and he removes them from the land of Judah, and he moves them actually to the area of his own city. He moves them to Babylon. This becomes the Babylonian captivity. So in the year 586, the Jews go into captivity in Babylon, and there's a very famous psalm that tells how the Jewish people were taken captives. They were brought to a new land. They were brought to a foreign country as exiles in Babylonia, and they were demanded by their captors to sing of their ancient land. And the psalmist says, "How can I sing of what was lost so long ago?" And then he issues those wonderful words, "By the waters of Babylon, we sat and wept for the lost land of Judah. We wept for Jerusalem." And he says the words, "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its cunning. Let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth if I remember you not, if I do not set Jerusalem above my greatest joy." The amazing thing is, what preserves the Jewish people in Babylonia as opposed to the northern kingdom is that they somehow managed to bring their religion with them. By 586, the Jews of Judea, the Jews of the southern land of Israel, were taken into exile, but they brought their religion with them. Their rabbis went with them, their scholars went with them. They maintained in their lands of exile synagogues. This is where the synagogue was created in Babylonia. Jews set up houses where they could gather together every Shabbat to remember the glory of what was in ancient Jerusalem, the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, the celebration in Jerusalem. And every week on the Sabbath day, Jews throughout the land of Babylonia, throughout the exile, would gather together community by community in what they called the Bet Knesset, the house of assembly, the house of prayer, the synagogue. They would gather together not only to pray as a community, but they also came together to read on a regular basis the words of the Torah. In other words, they continued their history. Their history remained with them. Every week, they would read a portion of the Torah, week after week, year after year. They kept alive their tradition. Amazingly, in spite of the fact that they were exiled to a foreign land, they managed to preserve their Judaism in exile. Thank heavens they did not have to wait too soon before they were redeemed, because the kingdom of Babylonia was itself conquered by another kingdom, the kingdom of Persia. And in the year 500 and in the year 539, the king of Persia, Cyrus the Great, who had recently defeated the Babylonian, gives not only the Jews, but also all peoples who Babylonia had conquered, he gives these people the right to return to their ancestral land. Basically, what he does is he says to the Jewish community who is living in exile, you have been taken into exile, you were captured, your kingdom, your city of Jerusalem was destroyed, you were exiled from your land of Judah, you have lived in captivity for close to a period of 50 years, but now that I have defeated the Babylonians, I give you permission, anybody who wants, to return to the land of your ancestors. You can go back to Jerusalem, your city, and to the land of Judah and reestablish your life. And the amazing thing is that despite having been in captivity for 50 years, you would think maybe they would have assimilated and disappeared too. A large number of Jews who retained their sense of Jewish identity decided to accept Cyrus's offer, and they returned to rebuild their city, Jerusalem, and they returned to their land of Judah. So for the first time in a period of 50 or so, 60 years since they've been taken captive, the Jews are given permission to return to their land, and they remain subject to other nations from that time forward. The Jews will never be independent from that time forward. First, they will be subject in 539 to Persia. Persia will rule them for a couple hundred years until Persia is defeated by Cyrus the Great, is defeated by another great. He is defeated by a man called a Macedonian called Alexander the Great. And Alexander defeats the Persians some hundreds of years later, in the year 325 approximately. He defeats the Persian Empire, and suddenly the land of Judah, which has been developing over those years under Persian overlordship, Alexander allows them to continue on and to maintain their sovereignty. But now, instead of paying tribute to Persia, they must now pay tribute to Alexander, to the Hellenistic Greek rulers who rule over them. And for the next period of years, they are bound to the various houses of the Greeks, to the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, and only for a short period of time will they regain their independence. Following the Greeks and their subjugation to the Greeks, the Jews eventually become subject to the Roman Empire. So you see, it follows like this. The Jews have their independence. They lose their independence first to Assyria and then to Babylonia. And then Jews are from that point on, they are subject to the larger kingdoms that control their affairs, that control their fate, first to Persia, then to the Hellenistic world of the Hellenistic world of Greece to the Ptolemies and the Seleucids to Egypt and to Syria. And then finally, they become subject to Rome about the year 60 before the Common Era. From that time on, the Jews will, from the destruction of Rome, they will go into exile. They will actually be forced out of the land, except for a very short period from the year 140 to 37 BCE. The Jews will, for a short period of time, 100 years, they will be independent one last time. Their rulers will be the descendants of the Maccabees. The dynasty is called the Hasmonean dynasty. And from 140, when the Hasmonean dynasty finally drives out the Assyrians from the land, until 37, when the Romans take control, for that brief period of time, from 140 to 37 BCE, between rule of Greeks and rule of Romans, Judea will become a independent state one more time. That is called the Second Commonwealth. So Solomon's kingdom was the first Commonwealth. It ends with the destruction of Israel and Judah. The Maccabees are known for that period of 100 years as the Second Commonwealth. At the end of that period, in the year 70, the Romans will destroy the Second Temple, will send the Jews into exile, and that exile will last until the establishment of the Third Commonwealth, which will be almost 2,000 years, 1948. There have only been 3 periods of Commonwealth in the history of the Jewish people. The first started with Joshua and the conquest of the land and ended with the destruction of Solomon's temple. The second occurred during the brief period of the Maccabees of 100 years. And the third period began in 1948, and it's not even 100 years old yet. So when you're talking about Jewish history, that's pretty much the outline. There was a first temple. It was destroyed by the Babylonians. There was a second temple. It was destroyed in 70 by the Romans. There is not yet a third temple, but we are now in the period when Jews look to the building of the third temple and the final establishment of the Third Commonwealth. And as I've indicated in previous sessions, there won't be any others besides that. This Third Commonwealth will be the end of it. It will end in this period. According to Jewish history, we are 5,785, 86 years into the counting of Jewish history. I already have mentioned that according to traditional Jewish interpretation, history will only last 6,000 years. From the time of the first civilizations in Egypt and Mesopotamia till today, 5,700, 5,800 years have passed. There's only about another 200 years to go till the end of the story of civilization. So that means we are really, truly in the final period of Jewish history. What I want to do to you today is talk about that period of time between the time that King Solomon dies and the time that the last of the kings of Israel end. This session is called the period of the kings and the prophets, the kings of Israel and the prophets. And in order to talk about this period, I'm going to remove this chart from before you.
Do you want the other one?
I'm done sharing.
Oh, you don't want to put the other one up?
I want to put the I want to stop sharing it. There we go. Okay. Everyone should now see a second chart in front of you. Okay. This chart is called the Kings of Israel and Judah and their prophets. If you look at the column in blue, though that is the kingdom of Solomon's son, Rehoboam, all the way to the destruction of Babylon in 597, it says, but the temple was destroyed in 586. The column on the left, the column in blue that says Rehoboam, Abiyah, Asa, Yehoshaphat, Yehoram, all the way it ends with Zedekiah, that is the kingdom of the south. That is Judah. If you count the kings, you will find there are 20 of them. Look to the kingdom on the right-hand side. That was the kingdom that broke away from Solomon. That was the kingdom that rebelled against Solomon, rebelled against his son Rehoboam, And it was led by a rival called Jeroboam, who was a servant of Solomon's. And if you will count, you will see from Jeroboam down to the end of the kings of Israel, that's Hoshea, there are 19 kings. Now, I should point out 19 kings. There were 20 kings in Israel, and in Judah, and Judah lasted for a longer period of time. Why? If you notice on the chart, Hoshea is overthrown in the year 722. Why are there more kings why does it continue on? Because the kings on the left-hand side, the kings of Solomon's son, rule longer and for more years than the kings on the side of Solomon's servant, okay? If you look at that list of kings, those are all of the kings of Israel from the death of King Solomon. And if you follow the chart, the blue chart, that is his line, his sons in the south. If you follow the sign in green, those are the tribes of the north that broke away from them. Now, you will notice in orange a group of names that are not connected with either group of kings. Those names that you see in orange are what we call prophets. You already are familiar with some of them. You already know that the prophet Samuel was the man who anointed Saul as king of Israel. So right at the top, on the left-hand side of the chart, you see it says Samuel, and then under Samuel, it says a man named Natan. After Samuel had died, after Samuel had anointed David, he dies. After David becomes king of Israel, there are officials in his court. There are what are called court prophets or formal prophets, but they're not the real prophets. The prophets that we know of came from all different kinds of life. They weren't official prophets. They were the prophets who arose, and they arose largely to upbraid and to chide the kings of Israel. If you want to know why there were prophets, it was because the kings of Israel and Judah were not very good kings. For the most part, the majority of them were bad. What usually happens when you establish a dynastic chain, a reign of kings one after the other, is the kings become progressively worse, or they become worse until a certain point, and suddenly a king comes who restores the situation, but then they get worse again. Of all the kings that you see on both sides of the chart, the blue and the green, the majority of them were not good kings. The majority of them gave in to their own conceit, their own power, their own sense of importance, and they went astray. And exactly what Moses had warned was going to happen happened to the people of Israel. They went astray after foreign nations. Their kings went astray after foreign gods. Believe it or not, even in the time of Solomon, who had married many foreign women, was led astray. One of Solomon's wives, a woman by the name of, let me see, I don't even remember her name anymore, but one of Solomon's wives who he had taken led him astray. Oh, her name, I'm sorry, I remember very well now who it was. It was a woman who lived after Solomon, actually. In the time of Ahab, her name was Jezebel. Basically, what happens is everything that the biblical prophets had talked about, or everything that the prophets before the kingdom talked about, happened. Israel became corrupt. And these prophets arose not because Israel wasn't pious. The temple existed. The people went to the temple. They brought the offerings. The priests did their job. Everything was functioning exactly as Moses and Aaron had set it up. Everything was working properly. The only trouble was the religion of the temple, the formal religion, the offering up of sacrifices became central. And what the kings of Israel and the people forgot about in general was righteousness. They were no longer just. They were no longer righteous. They were no longer compassionate. And therefore, the prophets of Israel arise to chastise the kings and the people and say to them, you are not doing what the God of Israel demanded of you. When God selected you to be a holy people, a nation of priests, When God set you apart from the other nations to be an example to the other peoples, he did not set you apart for just worship and offering of sacrifices. God doesn't, well, he does care. It's not enough to offer sacrifices. It's not enough to fulfill your rituals in the temple. It's not enough to follow the religious forms. You are not acting righteously. You are not acting justly. You are persecuting the poor. There is a growing division in your society between the very rich and the very poor. People are suffering. And in many cases, the rich took advantage of the poor. It became so bad, in fact, that the prophets had to chastise later kings for acts of injustice, telling them, in fact, you are behaving contrary to the law of God, and God will hold you to account. God will punish you. And indeed, he does. So all of the prophets that you see there, following Samuel and Nathan and Ahiah, all of these prophets are prophets during the time of the divided kingdom. Elijah, Elisha, Obadiah, Amos, Hosea, Yonah, Isaiah, Yeshayahu, Micha, Zephaniah, Nahum, Jeremiah, Habakkuk, and then continue on. Yechezkel, Ezekiel, Haggai, Malachi, and also Daniel and Zechariah. They come basically to tell the people you've screwed up. You've messed up. Okay. You may be following the ritual. You may be fulfilling that part of the law, but your society is corrupt. It is not just. You are not fulfilling the moral and ethical obligations that God laid out in the Torah. And consequently, God will require recompense from your hands. God will demand justice from you. And the reason, by the way, that the kingdoms of both Israel and Judah finally fell was because the societies had become so corrupt that over a period of time, first in the north in Israel and then in the south in Judah, societies had become so corrupt that they eventually lost their internal cohesion, and eventually God delivers them into the hand of their enemies, first the Assyrians, and then finally the Babylonians. The result is that the Jewish people go into exile. And some of the most beautiful literature in the Hebrew Bible, the books of the book of prophets, the prophetic books, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the 12 minor prophets. During this period of division, these are the prophets who try and return Israel to the correct path. They try and restore them to their proper vocation. They tell the people it is not enough merely to be religiously observant, not enough to fast and to offer sacrifices and to be ritually in accordance with the law. You must be morally and ethically in concert with the law as well. And eventually, both those kingdoms, the kingdom of Israel and then the kingdom of Judah, are destroyed. Okay, so those charts, and I'll send all of this to you. This shows the kings of Israel. You see Saul first, and then David. David is followed by Solomon, and then from the time of Solomon and his son and his servant, the kingdoms of Israel and Judah are divided. Society becomes progressively worse. Israel and Judah not only don't side with one another, they actually fight with one another, campaign against one another. And finally, their division is so great that neither kingdom is able to stand. And that leads to the exile and leads to the period recovering next, where Israel is now going to be subject to the three great empires, first to Persia, then to Greece, and then to Rome. Okay, I'm going to take the screen. I'm going to stop sharing for that for a moment. We're all back again. We have gone from the period of 1250 BCE, the Exodus, to the year 586 BCE, the destruction of the first temple. So we have gone for a period of about, roughly 700 years, and the first attempt at Jewish sovereignty has failed. The first attempt to build a Jewish kingdom by bringing the Jewish people, the sons, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God brought them into the land of Israel in the time of Moses and Joshua. Unfortunately, after they conquer the land, they divide up into tribes, and for a period of 180 years, they try and face their individual enemies. Finally, they are forced to come together under the three major kings of Israel, under Saul and David and Solomon. And after Solomon's death, the kingdom of Israel is divided again until first the northern kingdom and then the southern kingdom is destroyed. That, in short, is the history of biblical Israel. Okay. Is there any part of the Bible that goes on to after this? Oh, go ahead, Joseph. Go ahead. Your question. Go ahead.
So can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
So it seems to me we glossed over Solomon, that period, pretty quickly. But it seems to me, by what you said about building the temple and the other civic projects, building projects that under Solomon was being developed there in Israel, I could only speculate that that was the high water mark of perhaps all of Jewish history until perhaps now in the current state of Israel, that, given the temple, what amazing building and complex that was, bringing the civic people together, and then all the other building projects, it had to be, Jerusalem and Israel had to be like the pearl of, only maybe Babylonia could have rivaled Israel then as an advanced, progressive city, powerful city, held in high esteem. And if that's true, I speculate and want your opinion on this. If northern Israel and Judah didn't separate, or even if they did separate, but they maintained a great allied force together, would Assyria and Babylonia even attempted to attack such a power?
My own feeling is, Joseph, they would not. My own feeling is that the conquest of first the northern kingdom and then the southern kingdom was only made possible because of their division and their progressive weakness and their progressive turning to the peoples around them and forsaking the Torah of Israel. If you are asking me if Israel and Judah had remained united, would there have been a destruction of the first temple? This is all theory. I don't believe there would have been. Would there have been a conquest? I don't believe there would have been. If it had been a fairy tale, Joseph, Israel and Judah would have come together. You are right. Solomon was a great builder. You are right that in his time, Jerusalem attained the peak of its power and its beauty. Jerusalem was the marvel of the world. By the way, Joseph, there was another great king who was a great builder and a terrible king. His name was Herod, and he lives 1,000 years after. Unfortunately, the two kings who made Jerusalem a beautiful and strong and noted capital of Israel were horrible kings in terms of creating disunity among the people. So as beautiful as Solomon's temple was, and as magnificent as what he created was, and he was at the time of his life a major power in the Middle East. Had it not been for the division of the kingdom and the subsequent destruction of the two divided kingdoms, and then the following conquest, it is quite possible that we would have only been talking about one temple, and we would have all lived, Joseph, happily ever after. But Jewish history doesn't work like that. What happens instead is division, falling out, falling away from God, and finally, the very things that Moses had warned about. If you turn away from God, if you fail to keep his Torah, if you fail to keep his commandments, even if you offer your offerings and your sacrifices, even if you maintain your temple, none of that will avail you, Israel. If you forsake God and his Torah, you will be dispersed. You will go into exile. And that certainly happened. In 721 BCE, the northern part of Israel, the 10 tribes, were gone forever. In 586, the southern kingdom was destroyed, and the Jews of Judah went into exile. Only their commitment to the Torah in Babylonia allowed them to return and restore their kingdom again. But the truth is that you are right. Had it not been for that, we might have been looking at Joseph at a very different history. And the same is true of a second period. Had the Jews under the Maccabees, I'll give you another time. Under Solomon, they had sovereignty. When did they next have sovereignty? When they managed to defeat the Assyrian Greeks, when they managed to drive out Antiochus, and the Maccabees again ruled, and Israel once again became a regional power. It looked as if things were going to be good. As a matter of fact, Israel was an ally of Rome at that time. It was only their subsequent division, the fall of the Hasmonean dynasty, came about because of internal squabbles between members of the dynasty. If that had not happened, it is quite likely that Herod's temple would have remained the magnificent structure that it was. Oh, I'm sorry, Herod's temple was built afterwards, but it is likely that it would have remained a kingdom. But finally, that kingdom was destroyed too by the Romans. So 2 times we came into Israel. We attempted to establish it. The first kingdom was destroyed. Israel went into exile, and Judah went into exile. Judah returned for a period of time in the time of the Hasmoneans that had sovereignty again, and then passing from Persia to Greece to Rome, they lost their sovereignty. When they lost their sovereignty to Rome in the year 70 CE, that was the end of the country. The Romans eliminated a lot of them in the war, took many slaves, many were forced out of the country. And in fact, in the year, especially the years after the destruction of the temple, Bar Kokhba revolt, Jews started to spread all over the world. The prophecy we read about, where God said, I will disperse you to the 4 corners of the earth, and there you will be subject to other peoples who will treat you poorly, and you will once again call out to your God, and God will see you in your suffering, and he will ignore you. But eventually God says, I will remember you again, and I will hear your cry, and I will bring you back. Well, it's been a long trip since the Roman destruction in the year 70 to the return in the 70 CE for almost 1900 years, 1948 CE, the Jews did not have a kingdom. We were a wandering people. We had a religion. We were together. What bound us together was we had a Torah. We kept our faith in the midst of all kinds of nations. We lived among Persians. We lived among Greeks. We lived among Romans. We lived among Christians. We lived among Muslims. We lived in different countries all through the world. We didn't have a common language, although Hebrew remained the language of prayer. We had many different countries. We spoke many different languages.
You can count on prices that are the same.
Oh, I'm getting okay. The one thing that kept us together, however, was our religion. And finally, after all those years of persecution and dispersion, God once again, in the years following the Shoah, in the years following the Holocaust, heard the cry of Israel once again, and the unthinkable happened. After 1900 years without a land, without a common language, without all the necessities of being a nation, Israel returned to its homeland and reestablished its national life. That's where we are today. Is it an improbable history? Yes, very improbable. If you asked me, would you ever write a book about it? I probably would have said never, because if it was fiction, no one would have believed it. The story was too fantastic to ever have been accepted as a real story. People don't survive. The normal course of history is what happened to the northern tribes of Israel. You're exiled from your land, you're dissipated, you're dispersed among other nations, you assimilate, you lose your distinctiveness, you forget your religion, you disappear. Never in history has a nation been physically destroyed and people exiled and yet maintain their identity, except in the case of the people of Judah. That was the only time it happened. And they maintained that unity for all of this time. What made us a people was Torah, not a common land, not Israel, not a common language. Jews speak all kinds of languages and continue to speak all kinds of languages, not even common foods, because the Jews who come from Ashkenazic Middle East, come from countries in Europe, in Middle and Western Europe and Russia, eat different foods than the Jews who came from the Middle East and from Northern Africa. We have different customs, we have different traditions, we have different foods, we have different languages. Very little unites us. And yet, a country in the Middle East called Israel took Jews from all four corners of the earth, brought them back again from all their different societies, and united them again as a people, as a nation, because of their common religion. That is the miracle of Jewish survival. Next week, I will share with you how that happened. I will tell you very brief stories. Now it gets very brief. I will tell you about 3 empires. I'll tell you about how Persia managed to maintain control from the year 539 BC up until it was conquered by Alexander in the Hellenistic world in 325. I will tell you how the Hellenistic world maintained control over Israel up until the times it was conquered by the Romans, about the year 60, or actually 37 BCE. And then I will tell you how it was ruled by the Romans from the time they entered, about 60 BCE, until the time the Roman Empire fell. The Roman Empire fell in the West about the year 300, and in the East about the year 400. All of those empires are gone. Where is Babylonia? Doesn't exist. Where is Persia? Doesn't exist. Where is the ancient Hellenistic empires, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids? They're all gone. Where is Alexander in the great Hellenistic world? Gone. Where is Rome? Gone. Where is the Western Roman Empire? Gone. The Eastern Roman Empire, called the Byzantine Empire? Gone. And then we're going to go into Christian civilization and Muslim civilization and post-civilization. And one after another, each civilization was convinced they had destroyed us. In each civilization, they created a monument to mark our destruction. The first monument was Egypt. Remember, I told you the Merneptah Stela. The next monument that was created to mark Jewish destruction was in the period of the divided kingdom, shortly after the time of Ahab. The Moabites managed to conquer, or managed to win a battle against Israel, and they created a stone, a stela, called the Moabite stone, or the Mesha Stela, and I will show that to you next week. In it, the Moabites declare, we have destroyed Israel. So just like Merneptah in the year 1200, the Moabites in the year 700-800 also record the destruction of the kingdom of Israel. They say, Israel, the northern kingdom is no more, we conquered them. The Romans, when they destroyed Jerusalem in 70, they're going to build in the midst of Rome a large arch called the Arch of Titus. If you go to Rome, you can see it. That arch still exists today. It was built around the year 80 or 90 BC. You can still see it, still decorated with scenes of the Romans plundering the Jewish temple they had destroyed. That Roman Empire is gone. And Jews who had never walked under that arch in 1948 came and sang Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people lives. It is amazing. The material things in this world do not last. The memorials etched in stone all disappeared. Okay, and I will talk about them in the next week. The memorials etched in stone all disappeared, including later memorials. Some of them still exist today, but they're different. The Dome of the Rock, which sits over where the temple existed, still exists today, but I will argue that is a temporary monument too. In the church to mark the destruction of Judaism, if you've ever been to Notre Dame, when you go into Notre Dame, if you walk through the main doors of Notre Dame, which I understand has been amazingly restored and beautified, you will see 2 images in front of Notre Dame. You will see an image on the right, and you will see an image on the left. The image on the left is an image of a beautiful woman garbed in robes, carrying a staff, and she represents the church. She represents Christianity. Immediately to her right, the other portal on the entrance, is a woman in rags carrying a broken staff, and she represents the synagogue. The very front of Notre Dame was built as a testament to say, the old religion, the old covenant, the Old Testament, Judaism is broken. It has now become a widow, and a distraught widow at that, with a broken staff. She has been replaced by the church. That monument will too give passing. All the monuments to our history, including the latest monuments, Auschwitz, which declared the end of the Jewish people, they will all be destined to crumble to the ground. Monuments built in stone do not last. The Jews created their monuments, and with this I finish, not in stone, not monuments etched in stone. They created history written in parchment. Want to know why we survive? We didn't create structures that lasted thousands of years. We didn't create pyramids or ancient cities. You look around Israel today for something ancient apart from the Temple Mount, you won't find it. And even the Temple Mount, only the outer wall represents the original. What we built were parchments, documents, the Torah, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Jewish codes. We didn't build in space. We didn't build on stone. We built on parchment. We created a living civilization which we could pass from our generation to the next, which they carried on. Why do we survive? Because we managed to pass to our generations, to our descendants, a living tradition that we maintained. Civilizations that build in stone will eventually perish, because stone is material and it will perish. But a civilization that is based on a tradition written in parchment, a tradition that lives and breathes, that will go on, and eventually it will succeed. And that, up until now, where we are, is the story of the Jewish people. Do any of you have any questions? Go ahead, Craig, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. I don't know the exact time frames, but were standard dietary restrictions and ritual descriptions, were these all during the period that we've been talking about today? And if so, which of those did we take from the traditions around us versus those that came from us purely?
Okay. The laws, Craig, of kashrut, the dietary laws, the laws that we were commanded in the Torah, go back to the time of Moses, to the time 1250 BCE to today. So if you want to know the truth, the Jewish dietary laws have been in continuous existence from the time of the Exodus until today. Those laws remain. When I say Jews in different countries have different diets, Jews in Eastern Europe, where my ancestors grew up, they had potato latkes for Hanukkah. In the Middle East, they had cheese. Those things change. But Craig, if you are asking me, the continuity of Jewish law, did it maintain itself from the time of Moses until today, unchanged and unsullied? The answer, Craig, is an unqualified yes. There are Jews who have stopped observing it. I'm not going to pretend that everybody is observant, but I will tell you that Jews today who are observant, or if you want Orthodox, follow the exact same Torah and comply with the exact same tradition as it has been interpreted over these many hundreds and thousands of years. They follow the exact same laws. So the laws of kashrut are, Craig, the same.
And did we pull them from the communities around us, or did we come out with them de novo and no one else had ever considered it?
Unfortunately, what one Jews, wherever they lived, animosity from the peoples around them is, even though they did adopt to the societies in which they lived, they maintain their own distinctive tradition and they refuse to give it up. So wherever Jews lived, whether it was in Muslim Spain or Christian Europe or the Middle East, wherever Jews lived, yes, they adopted customs of the people around them. They spoke the language of people around them. But what made them Jewish, their ritual law, their Torah, that they kept, Craig, inviolate. Even if it meant they were persecuted, even if it meant they were set apart, even if it meant they were distinguished from their neighbors, they kept that separate and unique and continuously. Okay. Yes, Mark, go ahead.
So it seems that there's like a common theme to the whole history of we get kind of a foothold, we start making some progress, and then through our own failings or some other external forces, tragedy happens. And it almost seems like that's almost like a fated necessary step to go to the next thing that happens sometimes centuries later.
If you were a pessimist, Mark, you would say my attempt to end Jewish history coming up is going to fail. That even today in the Jewish world, Jews are divided. We are not only divided by our backgrounds, what countries and traditions we come from, we're now even divided more seriously by religion. There are observant Jews, and there are not observant Jews, and there are assimilated Jews who have nothing that identifies them as Jewish at all. You're saying to me, Rabbi, aren't we setting ourselves up for another failure? Isn't the same thing now going to happen, that now that we've found ourselves in Israel again, this whole unity thing, this whole unity project is destined to fail again, because we're going to fall out among ourselves and it's all going to dissolve, and we're going to go back to another exile and another division? I would say to you, Mark, without divine assistance, that could well happen, but that's not what's scheduled to happen.
Actually, I'm pretty optimistic that maybe this is the final iteration, that we finally went through enough of those,
No
passages.
No more. Yes, this is the final iteration. God has said, we tried it once, you didn't make it. You suffered. You came back for a short while, you didn't make it. You suffered longer. Now you're back, and you're definitely not a united people. Jews are anything but a united people. You can see them together. But despite that, despite the fact that we are not all observant, I firmly believe, and the tradition firmly believes, that events will transpire that will bring the Jewish people back to Torah, that events will become so clear that Jews who would never, ever, ever have thought about settling in the land of Israel, let alone following the Torah, will do that. I've been reading the latest statistics from Europe. I've been reading the reports of Aliyah. I am telling you, migration has reversed. It is not dispersion anymore. We are now in a period of reconcentration. And even for those of us who feel very comfortable in our exile in America, I am telling you, it's coming here too, okay? You may think that you are the exception. You may think that, other nations and other times, they've had their problems and they failed to learn the lesson, but we've learned the lesson, and it can never happen to us here, that we are protected against all the things that Jews have always worried about: hatred, anti-Semitism, persecution. It is an illusion. It is an illusion. And God, through history, will teach us that it is an illusion. And the story of the Jewish people will mark this final phase. No more iterations. This will be it. Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, one last question, Rabbi. When Joshua crossed over,
Yes.
weren't there 2.5 tribes left in Jordan?
Yes, but here's the thing, Larry. Yes, and if you look at the map I sent, you will see that 2.5 tribes were on what we call the east side of the Jordan River.
Correct.
They were considered part of Israel. As a matter of fact, Israel was not just the tribes in the west of the Jordan River. It included the 2.5 tribes on the east. You are correct. Reuven was one tribe. Gad was one tribe. And the half tribe of Manasseh, half the tribe of Manasseh was there too. So if you look at the map I sent you this past week, you will see Reuven in the south. You will see Gad in the middle, and then you will see Manasseh further up. They're on the east side, but that was all part of Israel. By the way, Israel at its maximum size almost actually realized the dimensions the Bible speaks of. It almost went in its heyday, the time of Solomon, from the Egyptian river, from the border of Egypt to the Sea of the Euphrates River. It extended that far. Israel included all of that territory. So actually the ideal Israel, the ideal image of Israel, the future Messianic Israel will be much bigger than it is today.
Well, did the Assyrians take over those tribes as well?
The Assyrians yes, the Assyrians, okay, the Assyrians defeated the tribes in the north. In 721, the tribes that had settled in the north, as well as the tribes that had been settled on the east, were all defeated by the Assyrians. Only the tribes in the south remained, Larry, and then in 586, they were fated to fall too. So yes, from great expanse, from great territory to very little. Of course, Israel's a small area, so all those areas you show on the map, they're small areas anyway. All right. I don't mean to be trite, but this has been an intriguing time. I'm not sure how we're going to handle all the history for next week. We are going to attempt to cover about 500 years of history next week. The Persian Empire, the Hellenistic Empire, the brief period of the Maccabees, and the entry of Rome. We're going to all do that in next session. That is session number 7. Session number 8. We'll continue with the Roman wars, the wars 8 and 9. And the final session will deal with the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans, their going into exile, and the dispersion of the Jewish people throughout the land. That will take us through the end of what is called biblical history. It is both the biblical period and what we call classical antiquity, the time of Greece and Rome too. It will take us up till what we call the Middle Ages, which we will start next time. All right, I haven't lost you all. I'm grateful for that. I'm glad you're staying with me. I will send copies of this out to you, the video for today. Could we take this, stop the recording now? Okay, right there. Okay.